So, my name is Jose Carranza, and today I'll be presenting on Cuba. So, to begin with, Cuba's geography is relatively close to the south of Florida and relies precisely on the negative 82.38 longitude and 23.13 latitude. The population of Cuba is currently 11,433,588, and their capital is Havana. Since Cuba is a rather minute island, a handful of 35 ports exist on the island's lining. So Cuba also contains cityscapes, but also holds precious plantation fields where many of their resources are cultivated. So now, moving on to historical events, I'll divide it up by centuries. And so in the 15th century, Cuba was claimed by Christopher Columbus for Spain, unknowingly igniting a controversial history line of such a small island. In the 16th century, the first African slaves set foot in Cuba, thereafter igniting the process of the liberation of Cuba with the small onfoot of the abolishment of slavery. So, during the 17th century, Cuban authorities state that tobacco sales to foreigners are punishable by death, somewhat resembling the embargo which later took place in Cuba's history restricting from us trying out their goods. And so now, in the 18th century, Havana's cathedral was completed, but the moments to take place in the 19th century, such as the 10 Years' War, were anything but holy. The 10 Years' War was where Cuban-born planters and other wealthy natives fought for Cuba's independence. In the 20th century, the Communist Party was legalized once more, paving the path for Castro's dictatorship and reign of terror. A reign filled with vast political dilemmas, one of the most prominent being the Cuban Missile Crisis. Once the 21st century rolled in, Fidel's time came, and he resigned as president of Cuba in 2008. So now, when speaking about Cuba's culture, Cuba's primary language is Spanish, accompanied by constant hand gestures, making the language all the more authentic. Cuba's dialect is much similar to the Hispanic Caribbean islands, and any indigenous language/tongue which existed no longer lives. As for social structure, prior to 1959, class divisions were more apparent, with the largest class being the peasants. And in the other extreme of the social spectrum were the small handful of wealthy mill owners. And under Castro's reign, no one was more than the other, for social classes were nearly abolished. The thought of no class differentiation caused many middle and upper class to leave Cuba. And so when speaking of government, Cuba was withheld to their communist regimen since 1959, heavily believing in the one state, one party mentality. Cuba, to be precise, is a Marxist-Leninist system led by Castro up until 2008. Cuba's current political situation resides in the hands of now President Miguel Diaz-Canel. Executive power in Cuba is enforced by the government, which consists of the Council of State and Council of Ministers. The legislative power is represented by the unicameral National Assembly of People's Power, which is blessed as the maximum authority of the state. So moving on to the economy. Cuba's economy is fruitful due to its dense natural resources such as cobalt, nickel, iron ore, chromium, copper, salt, timber, silica, petroleum, and arable land. Now, the arable land gives off many byproducts great for export, which consist of sugar, tobacco, and rum, to name a few. As for Cuba's infrastructures, in 1959, they were one of the most progressive in Latin America, but have yet to advance since then. Cuba's GDP is currently $87 billion, and their income per capita sits at $5,539. So when speaking of trust and corruption, throughout 2016 to 2018, Cuba's trust and corruption index has remained steady at 47, meaning Cuba is not dangerously untrustworthy, yet still holds some corruption. Now, the Cuban culture, according to Hofstede, states Cubans are without a doubt collectivistic and seek to be in community most of the time. Since there is not much room for climbing up the social ladder, Cubans are also feminine for competition, since it's not heavily necessary. Cubans are also not receiving the most benefits under their current political system, which is why they are short-term oriented. They have to first focus on getting by day by day. Cubans also respond to high power distance since conditions in Cuba are not ideal. Therefore, losing a job would equal in more struggle. Lastly, after all which has been stated, there is no surprise in Cubans' high uncertainty avoidance, since the little they have they must cherish, for nothing more can be gained.